It is finally here, guys. The first installment of the Legacy of the Bretons year-long adventure, and is on PTS right now. In this video though, I want to go through and talk about some of the changes for PvP and just the game generally, and give you a heads up so you know what to expect going forward. I'm Dan, this is Unified Gaming, and we're just going to jump straight into it. So first and foremost, what does the patch bring? The patch brings 2 new dungeons as always, so the Coral Aerie and then the Shipwright's Regret. In these you can get cosmetics, you can get titles, that kind of stuff, as well as new sets. In the Coral Aerie dungeon you get Malekith's Maelstrom. This gives you magicka, healing and weapon and spell damage, and this 5-piece is really interesting. On overhealing yourself or a group member with a direct heal, you apply this buff to them and it lasts for 6 seconds. Anybody around that target will take damage up to 3,300. So if you overheal somebody with say a 10k heal and they need 5k to get to max health, you'll get the max value from this, which is very easy in PvE, and as a result there'll be pulsing damage around them every second. This is a great set for PvE off healers in dungeons, especially because it's just free damage you can give to your group and you can apply this to lots of people. It does say every 10 seconds and it doesn't say whether that's per person or whether that is the internal cooldown for everyone. If this is per person, this is a phenomenal healer set for PvE because you can apply this bonus damage all the time. I would imagine though it is going to be 10 seconds and it can't apply to anyone, so we will get on PTS and test that. As for PvP, I can see this being quite good for healers being a bit tankier because they are doing damage around them. Not a lot, but it does add up quite quickly, so this could be quite useful for some builds. The medium armor set, Griffin's Reprisal. This is it's an okay set. It's crit chance and crit chance plus penetration. When you deal crit damage, you can activate a synergy yourself or somebody else, which is similar to how the graveyard works on Necromancer, and a small griffin will fly out and deal bleed damage to anybody nearby, similar to Stampede. The synergy can be applied every 20 seconds, so a big cooldown, and it will scale with your weapon or spell damage. If you did tune into the reveal event, one of the developers was showing this set and the tooltips, and it was about a 14 to 15k tooltip. Now that was just with a typical build apparently, so this could be quite a potent set, but the balance is this massive cooldown and obviously the bleed being 10 seconds, so it's not bursty. I will go on PTS and check this out as soon as I can, so make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss out. Our next set is a heavy armor set, a Glacial Guardian. It's armor, health recovery and stamina, and after blocking you will tether to somebody, and while you're tethered you do frost damage, and anybody that is touching the tether, including the target I assume, would get 200% increased status effect chance. If the tether breaks, then you can't do it again, and the damage is scaled with obviously your max health. So this is going to be quite good for any kind of tanky build that wants to snare people in place and do damage with procs. The best way to think of this is something like the Wrath of Elements Destro staff from the Vatashan Halls of Hollow, so where you tether to somebody and it does damage, similar thing, damage but also extra status effects. This could be quite an interesting set, quite a kind of trolly set in my opinion, especially for battlegrounds, but we will test it and see how it works. We then have Kagara or Kagira, however it's pronounced, so apologies for the pronunciation. Really good one piece. It's just max stat, but it's dual stat, so that's quite interesting. And when you do a heavy attack, you create a whirlwind that slowly moves forward for 8 seconds, getting larger every time, and it will do shock damage to anybody nearby and physical. Allies within this though do get 10% cost reduction on their skills, which is great, and it does scale off your weapon and spell damage, whatever's higher. As for Shipwright's Regret, what are these sets like? Well, we have Storm Curse Revenge. This is a light armor set, and this could be quite an interesting set depending on how it scales. It's magicka, weapon and spell damage and penetration, so good 2, 3 and 4 pieces. When you deal shock damage, you have a 15% chance to deal shock damage to the enemy and 2 other people nearby. This scales off your weapon and spell damage. It doesn't say how high the shock damage is, but this could be quite a good crowd control set in PvE, especially for clearing like dungeons and stuff. And it doesn't seem to be a cooldown too. So if you want a sorcerer stacking loads of shock damage, so Bound of Storm, Elemental Blockade, a Lightning Splash for example, this could be having quite a high uptime. As for PvP, it's going to be hit and miss in all honesty. That 15% is pretty low and people aren't always 5 meters next to each other. So unless it's a really big proc, I can't see this being that useful. We didn't have Spriggan's Vigor. This is a medium armor set. It's crit, it's stamina, and it's weapon and spell damage. When you deal critical damage, you gain a stack of Wild Growth for 5 seconds and restore 100 stamina, and this can stack 10 times. This is a really good set. Each stacking also increases your max stamina as well. So if you treat this as basically a sustain set and a max stat set in one, which gives you more damage, this could be a really potent set. So I'm really interested to see how this works, and this could be quite popular. The only downside though is the critical damage can be a bit hard to land in PvP with crit chance being quite low, so it could be hit and miss. For the heavy armor set, we have Turning Tide. This is based on one of their new mechanics with water as kind of a boss mechanic, so you'll see some new element types here. It's health, stamina and health, so standard heavy armor stats. After blocking, you gain flowing water for 10 seconds, causing your next bash attack to deal magic damage up to 6 enemies in a 10 meter line, and apply a major vulnerability for 10 seconds, which increases their damage. This is going to be really good. If you are on a bash build, I know Fragman Soul absolutely loves them. He's got loads of videos, like hilariously fun to play and trolly, so definitely sort of look at him. This was just going to be perfect for that kind of playstyle. You block and you return loads of damage back, and it's a proc set that scales with health. Because it scales with health, you can just invest pure in tankiness and still have some damage from the proc, so this could be quite a fun trolley set to use. As with the monster set, I'm going to try and pronounce it. I am dyslexic, so bear with me. Nazarare? I absolutely butchered that. Nazarare, I think it's pronounced, or Nazarar. Anyway, it's health, and when you use your ultimate ability, the closest 6 enemies within 12 meters, quite low, will have all the damage over time, major buffs and minor buffs, debuff, sorry, extended by 1 second per 25 ult spent. Yeah, take that in for the moment. Anytime that you use your ultimate, any debuff on that target will have that extended. This does not apply to beam damages or damage tethers, and this can occur every 20 seconds per target. Is it any good? Well, my initial thoughts, and I saw lots of people come to the same conclusion, is this on a DK with Venomous Claw could be phenomenal. If you're unsure, Venomous Claw has a scaling on it where it does bonus damage the longer it's active. And so if this allows that scaling to go up infinitely, you should be getting really big ticks on that claw, like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 ticks every second, which could be incredibly potent. So this could be a really good set on a DK, especially with things like Noxious Breath, which has major fracture in it, major breach, so armor debuff. Then you have obviously crazy dots from it itself, and then Venomous Claw. You could use Rend, or you could use Bloodlust, for example. You could have quite a nasty dot build if you can get an ultimate with this. And it doesn't say that you have to use a damage over time ult. You could use a leap as well. So you could leap onto somebody. The only thing I would like to check, and I don't know the answer, is does the AoE happen upon cast or upon when you do damage? So if you cast leap, will the AoE apply where you are, or would it apply where you land? And that's really important, because if it applies where you land, you could use this on a normal DK build with no compromise whatsoever. But if it does, apply when you cast it, then you need to be near to the target, or maybe use something a bit easier like a dual wield ult where you have to be next to them pretty much. That's kind of the new sets though, and on the whole they're pretty interesting. Nothing really jumps at us really OP, but I'd like to know what you guys think. Do you think they're really busted or not? The other big change to this is changed achievements and stuff, but it's actually combat and some new PvP sets. For the new PvP sets, we have Rallying Cry, and this is by far one of my favourite sets in the game. It's crit chance, and magicka, but this 5-piece is phenomenal. While Battle Spirit is active, so anywhere in PvP, critically healing yourself or an ally causes you and up to 11 people to gain 300 weapon and spell damage and 1650 crit resist for 20 seconds. This is a phenomenal buff. Loads of damage and loads of crit resist. It's like transmutation plus powerful assault in one set. What makes this really good though is that you can use this as a solo player or a small scale player and get more out of it. Every person that gets affected by this buff, it will reduce all the damage people get and the critical resist. So you can actually lose a lot of this damage if you're in a big group, so it can't be used by Zergs, can't be used by large groups. So in Battlegrounds, this is a great set because you're only going to lose, 60 damage and a little bit of crit resist. So you're still getting 240 weapon and spell damage if you hit all of your team with it, plus like 1200 crit resist. So this is phenomenal for Battlegrounds in my opinion. We then have Hue and Sunder. And with these sets, they do come from Wards of the Worthy, so you do need to open those boxes and hope RNG's on your side. The medium set is Hue and Sunder. This is stamina, and weapon and spell damage. And this kind of sets a precedent for what they're trying to do with heavy attack builds. When you deal damage with a heavy attack, you gain penetration for each enemy within 8 meters of your target. So they're trying to make heavy attack builds not as potent as they are currently, and you'll see that further down. You then have another set which is Enervating Aura, I think it's pronounced. It's healing, taken, health and armor, and this is a heavy armor set, so standard. When you deal damage, you have a 10% chance to create an area under the target that detonates after 1 second, a bit like Dark Convergence. It applies the debuff to people and it lowers all of the recoveries. This is quite an interesting debuff and it's a new one in the game from what I've seen, and this could be really good to just help stop people from sustaining. So I would really love to see ZOS expand this idea and maybe add this into some class kits. We have like minor and major innovating. So the idea is that you can really punish people's sustain and then try and stop them from sustaining infinitely. Really interesting set. Is it going to be great? I don't think so, but I love the idea of it. They then added some Imperial City monster sets, which is great. Got none attack, which is armor. On dealing frost damage, you create an area under the target and it applies Chilling Bite. Chilling Bite does frost damage and applies a stack of snare for 4 seconds. If they get 4 stacks, 100% snare, they are immobilized, so locked in place, and they get Major Brittle, which means they take 20% more crit damage. Really good debuff. The issue is it doesn't say how big the Chilling Bite radius is. And the chilling, so this could be a very small radius or it could be very large like a Winter's Respite. So this does need testing and it could be quite a good set for some builds, especially that Major Brittle. I think even in PvE, just having Major Brittle is a really good debuff to get. So this could be quite an interesting one to run. You then have Lady Malagada, or how you pronounce that. Penetration. When you deal damage to a target within 12 meters, you create an area under them, so similar to the one above. And it quickly moves forwards and then returns and it does shock damage and applies the minor innovation for 5 seconds, causing the target to take 10% less crit damage. So quite an interesting sort of set really. The obviously crit they do will be less, which is good. I don't think this will be great in PvP personally, so it depends on the damage. If the damage is good, it's going to be a good set, but I don't see it currently. Then Baron Thrisk, this is by far the most interesting out of the 3 monster sets added in Imperial City. It's got dual stat recovery, which is by far one of the best dual stats you can get. It's a really good dual stat. On dealing an area direct damage, mark a target for 6 seconds. Every 2 seconds after an explosive scamp is spawned nearby and detonates after 1 second, dealing magic damage to up to 6 enemies within 4 meters and applying minor timidity for 10 seconds. It drains the ult, 1 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. This is a really interesting mechanic. I don't know how it's going to function with pets being buggy and awkward, but this could be a lot of fun to play with, and I will be trying to farm this and test this on PTS as quick as I can. So make sure that you are subscribed to see that. The one thing I love about this is the fact that it gives you scamps and they just explode and they're really fun to see. So this could be really interesting. You've then got some PvP outfits and stuff. So you can unlock new cosmetics and stuff if you open chests and stuff in Imperial City. You can't trade the pages though, so just bear that in mind, but you can trade Telvar somewhat, so it's not an exclusive PvP set in my opinion, but at least it might encourage more people to go there. They've added a few new things like Deconstruction Assistant, multi-rider mounts, so details there, new furniture and stuff. And then the big thing is the changes to the base game and combat. So the big thing they've tried to do in this patch is really give every skill kind of that hybridization. So the idea is that they will scale with your offensive stats, weapon and spell damage, or stamina and magicka, and we'll just use all of it rather than just being a stamina skill scaling with weapon damage. It now scales with whatever's higher. So this is a really good idea. They do make it very clear that this doesn't work with shields and backlash, and so I'm not sure whether this is just a heads up it's going to be something we're doing in the future, or it's going to be something we're going to have to wait and see. And they haven't said it works for healing just yet. It's only offensive stats, so heals might scale with this. I'd need to check it in all honesty, but we'd have to wait and see. And it does say player abilities, so it could be healers as well, because well, they do scale with offensive stats too, so that we need to check. They also said that any buff that you get, like Major Savagery and Prophecy, are combined, Brutality and Sorcery are combined, so any skill that gives you one, you now get both, but all the passives do remain the same because of class identity. As with the DK, they've changed a few things which are really important and you do need to pay attention. Engulfing Flames, the bonus damage now goes up with weapon and spell damage, so it's a mix of both, and the cap is reached when you have 9,000 spell and weapon damage combined. For most builds, this is pretty much reached a lot of the time. A lot of stamina builds have 6-7k weapon damage by themselves with at least 2 or 3k spell damage. So for stam builds, this is hit always pretty much. And if you use Battle Org as well, you'll be on there most of the time. The big change though is Burning Embers, and this changes how DK plays massively. In the past, it was a burst heal, so when you cast the skill, it would tick and do damage, and then when it ran out or you recasted it, you got a big burst heal. What they've now done instead is to make it have 100% more healing, 100% healing. So rather than 75, it's got a 25% heal buff. Great, more healing, but it heals every time it does damage. Now it doesn't say that it has a cap, so you could cast this on lots of people and have lots of incoming healing, which could be really, really good. But you don't get that big burst heal before that DK is really used to. Yes, you have Cauterize and a few other skills, like your ultimate can give you some healing. So your sustain healing is going to be significantly higher, but your burst healing is going to be a lot weaker. So for anybody trying DK, this is a great quality of life change for you because it's going to help you stay alive yet longer. But for those people that are very skilled with using Burning Embers, then you're not going to have that big burst heal which really helps you go from 20% to 100% health instantly. So just do factor that in when you play with this. They changed a Draconic Power Spiked Armor and just basically made it scale properly, so it does damage with all of the stuff now and armor too. As with the Necromancer, the Bone Goliath, they just fixed a few issues with it, so the bash now kind of works properly, and it does also proc enchantments and poisons. The Scythen also works better, and Archer actually now scales damage wise correctly, whereas before it didn't. With Living Death, they also fixed some issues with the tether as well, so hopefully this may stop people stacking it and getting dual heals. It might not, we have to wait and see. With the Nightblade, they are changing Assassin's Blade a little bit, and they're just making it really be more functional. Before it's a bit buggy, so this might be better now. At the moment, I never run this because the damage is not worth it. 9 times out of 10, if they're in 25% health, you can just kill them with a spammable. So this might be better because it now might actually trigger properly, which maybe it wasn't before. Grim Focus, they have also just reduced the radius down to 28 meters from 30, so it will reset. What this means is if you have the focus to fire, if you have the bow ready to fire, and the target is 30 meters away, you can still fire it currently. Now if they're 30 meters away, you can't because they've gone past 28 meters. That's all it is. And Teleport Strike, they've just explained that you do get the cast time on it, which you did anyway, so just a bit of clarification for players. With the Shadow, they've basically changed some stuff so it works a bit more smoothly with the heals, so Refresh and Path. This now heals 1 less, but you do get more healing overall, so you get basically the same, slightly better, but 1 less tick. They did change Strife as well, and Funnel Health. These are the heal morphs, so the ones that when you use this, you get healing back from it. They do a little bit more damage, but not massively. They have changed Crystal Weapon, and this is quite a big change, but I don't think it's massive in my opinion. Crystal Weapon will now replace Imbued Weapon or its morphs after casting. So if you cast crystal weapon and then you cast imbued weapon, which is the Sigil Order skill, you could stack them together and light attack and do loads of damage. You can't do that anymore. The difference, however, is that you can cast crystal weapon and then another spammable and they both land together. So I don't think this really addresses the burst, in my opinion, and just seems a really unnecessary change. This does also affect range bow builds where you could cast crystal weapon, light attack and then imbued weapon and it would all land at once whilst it's traveling, which gives you a bit more oomph on a bow build. So this is a bit of a sad change in my opinion and I don't think it's warranted. You then have Daedric Mines and they've just changed the scaling so it's more consistent. Same with Encase. And Bound Armor, they've just fixed a few bugs here too. In Storm Calling, they've changed how the armor buffs work, so you now get 20 seconds at base rather than 15. And if you go with Boundless Storm, which is the magical morph, you get 30 seconds uptime from 23, so a massive amount of just duration. The speed buff will be the same most likely, and it will no longer rank up in damage because it's not a damage skill. Hurricane, however, this now lasts a lot longer. The damage grows from 8 to 15 seconds. So when you get to 8 seconds of the armor, it then does a lot more damage. And this does result in an extra 10% damage overall, but you don't get that bonus damage early on. You have to kind of have it building up for a while. So, you know, it's a slight change. I don't think it's going to change much in all honesty. For the Templar in the Aedric Spear, they've changed the Burning Light, so it now only does magic damage, but it always scales with physical or spell damage or whatever's higher, so there's no real change here really. The only caveat is penetration might be a factor. If you have unequal penetration values, which is quite hard nowadays, then this will be a slight nerf for some people. They've changed charge so it's just more consistent. Javelin now also bypasses block, so this is a really cool change. So this is good against tanks. Puncturing strikes, biting jabs. This is a really interesting change. When you cast this skill, you now get major brutality and sorcery for 10 seconds. So rather than getting that crit, which is on Sunfire already, and prophecy, so that's a passive, you can the skill, you can now get the actual damage buffs. And Templars always lack that damage buff. Now this is only for Stamina Templar, so I hope they add something to Magicka Templar because you are still reliant on degeneration or entropy. So just bear that in mind, but this is a way to get damage without needing rally anymore. Spear Shards, they've also increased the range of this, so nothing massive. And on the Radiant Morph Ward, Sun Shield Morph, they have increased the scaling up to 20% from 9%. So this is a really big change and this could make the skill more interesting to use. So this is the one that when you cast it, you put a shield and you can absorb damage and it goes bang and you do damage around you. So this could be quite a good shield. Dawn's Wrath, Eclipse, the Living Dart, they've just reduced the snare to 40%, which is much better in my opinion. And on Unstable Core, which is a damage one, they have put the internal cooldown up properly because before it could proc too often, doing a lot more damage than it was meant to. As with Restoring Light, they've just fixed a few passive issues not working, so now it does. For Warden, they've changed Scorch, which is the Magicka Beetles, and Deep Fissure is the morph they've changed. The Major Breach now lasts for 10 seconds from 6, so that's your armor debuff. I don't think this is a great change personally. It's free, Major Breach, but most people are casting this every 3 to 5 seconds, at which point you have 100% uptime anyway. So I would personally prefer they put off balance on this skill, so you actually have a stun that you could use in melee range as a Warden. So that would be my ideal change. They have changed Growing Swarm, which is the stamina morph. This now can only be applied to one person, but the area of effect has been increased, so that's that. Fungal Growth, which is the Mushroom Heal. They've increased the healing to make it more consistent with others, and it does cost the same because it's quite narrow, so you get more healing for the same resources, which is great because it's a very, quite a hard heal to use. Healing Seed, they've just changed a few things with this, but the Corrupting Pollen, they have actually made this more interesting. When you use this skill, it debuffs people with Major Defile like before, but now it only focuses on the lowest enemies first. So anybody who's low health, this will try and defile them first before the other people, which could really help, with confirming kills and stuff. Lotus Flower's seen a big change. The cost has been reduced by almost half, or over half. It's a really, really big change. It's also Major Prophecy and Savagery, and you have two choices. Green Lotus now gives you a heal on your light attacks for 2 people, so it could be you and somebody else. The heal is also higher, and you are the same with the heavy attack. It does last the same amount of time, so about sort of 10 seconds or so. Lotus Blossom though is the magical morph that when you use this, it now lasts 60 seconds. So you're healing on every light attack for 60 seconds. This is a massive duration. I think 60 is a bit too high. Maybe 40 would be good, but this is definitely a really big change for this skill line here. I think Green Lotus is probably the go-to for PvP in my opinion. Healing for you and somebody else for just doing light attacks for very little maintenance is really good, worth considering, and you get crits as well. Nature's Grasp, they have reduced the heal from Nature's Embrace, which is the vine pool that heals you and somebody else. Really powerful heal. They have nerfed it a bit, which is kind of needed personally, so I understand that. And then Bursting Vines, which is the morph that you can cast and it kind of explodes. They have reduced the heal a bit, so it doesn't go too high. For the Crystallized Shield, so Shimmering Shield, which gives you heroism, they've just made it so it actually procs consistently. And they've also increased the Ice Armor buff just by 1 second, so I don't know why. And then for the two-handed weapons, they've changed Critical Rush, so that's the one that always crits. Now, rather than it doing bonus damage as it levels up, it's now going to get cost reduction. That means it's got about a 4% damage nerf, so the Critical Rush is about 4% weaker than it is currently. Momentum, which is the 2H rally or forward momentum skill that gives you the damage buff, now gives you sorcery too. And they have increased the final cost, so this does go up quite a bit. The duration though does last a lot longer, so that's the trade-off. If you use Reverse Slice, which is the AoE of Executioner, you then get it. It's a bit more expensive, but it does have 100% splash damage now, which is great for PvE. And the Executioner has also lost that 1% damage per rank, so this is about a 4.4% nerf to Executioner. In all honesty, it's not going to change it much because it's a very strong skill. In One-Handed and Shield, they've changed this quite a lot, and Power Bash is now actually a bash damage skill and is treated as bash damage. So this will work with like glyphs and stuff. It does not get cost reduction though, so if you use cost reduction glyphs, it won't work. And then the Power Slam morph, again, scales with bash damage and glyphs. This now just, instead of stacking up to 10 times, it now just has a 33% bonus to it. So this is a really good spammable for bash builds. And this will make it really kind of, it's a niche playstyle, but very effective if used right. So this is a really good spammable now. So you can literally go bash, cast skill, and get a lot of damage. Shield Charge, they changed a few things here. The shield's a bit higher, that's it. Invasion is just a bit cheaper. Flying Dagger is still terrible. Acid Spray, they changed Bombard, which I think is really great. It doesn't snare people anymore. It's a really toxic skill. It immobilizes and it snares. Now it just snares, now it just immobilizes. So a much more balanced skill, and you can actually play around it. So those groups where they have somebody just spamming this skill, snaring you constantly and immobilizing you every 4 seconds, is now going to stop doing that. It will still lock you in place, but you can roll and move at full speeds to get away still. So a much more counterplay. Poison Arrow, they've changed Venom Arrow, which now gives you brutality and sorcery. So when you're on a bow build, you can now access your damage buffs, which is amazing. So this is a great change in my opinion, really good change. In the Restoration Staff, they've changed Blessing of Protection. Now it just has more consistent healing, but the issue is that the cost is significantly higher. So yes, you get much more healing, but it costs much more. The Blessing of Restoration morph, which gives you the buff, the heals and stuff, gets you really high heals, and buffs last a bit longer. But the other one's obviously going to be even more healing should you use it. For Ward Ally, this will now be cheaper, but the shield will be slightly less because of that 1.1% change. For Soul Magic and Soul Trap, the ability now is magic damage, but it still scales dynamically, so whatever's higher. So this still works. The only people that will see a nerf is if you're a stamina build with physical penetration being greater than your magic penetration, so your spell pen. It should include your physical pen, but it doesn't always. Vampiric Drain, they've increased this by 50% per tick, so the damage is going to be significantly higher. The damage is pretty low to begin with though, so I don't think this is a good damage skill, but I need to test this. I can see this being quite trolly if you build this right, so I will be trying to make this work. Piercing Howl, they've just fixed a few issues with Werewolf. And in Sigil Order, the Imbued Weapon, they've changed this so it's now really cheap. It's 2,700, which is really good for all classes. And the idea is that this will now kind of act as your spammable if you wish, but every other class spammable and weapon spammable has some kind of auxiliary effect, so it does something else. whereas this is just damage. So it's cheap damage, but you might lose a secondary buff or debuff. Magic debt, they've just fixed a few issues with proxy debt. And then they've changed a few things with sets, so that way they're just more consistent. Before, some sets that weren't like weapon or spell damage procs, but had things like when you roll and stuff, it now just makes it more consistent. So they will actually trigger properly, whereas before it was a bit hard to see when would it trigger, could something trigger or not. The big ones are obviously Aegis Caller or Thunder Caller. They could obviously trigger Dark Convergence, not too common in PvP, and Dark Convergence could also trigger Hrothgar, which was common, and it's a really interesting combo, but could be pretty busted, so they have just fixed that. They've just fixed a few issues with some sets, but nothing massive. The only big one is Curse of Doilamesh. This is a set from Scarecaller Peak. When you heavy attack somebody who's stunned in PvP, you do loads of damage. It scales with health, so really good burst set. The issue with this is that it was actually doing damage on the stun from stealth. So if you stun somebody, you could actually get them with you get the stun and get this proc at once. So Nightblades were using this to get crazy damage and stuns together. As with Flame Blossom, they've just made this actually land consistently. This is a really good set. I really like this set. But now it's actually going to work even better, so this is a good set to use on a Nightblade. Noble Duelist and Undaunted sets, they've changed these, so the numbers look high, but they're actually a nerf. So they now add like the Noblest Duelist Silks adds 2,681 weapon and spell damage to your light and heavy attacks, rather than 1,811 damage to these attacks. This means that this will do about 30-40% less damage than it does currently. So just do factor that in, that these are nerfs to these heavy and light attack builds. Same with the Undaunted sets too. I've been on the editor as well just to kind of check, and the changes basically were a nerf. So you will see less damage with these sets than you do on live. They have fixed an issue with Kina. So loads of people were abusing it last patch, and I didn't make a video on it because it was pretty cheesy. But you could activate this in stealth. So you didn't have to be in combat, you could just light attack, and it would work. You'd have crazy damage, and you could gank somebody from 30k health to 0 instantly. I think Malcolm did a video on a Dragon Knight, where he was basically using this, and using some other sets, so like Truthful and Swarry for example, and was just proccing them in stealth because they were buggy, and you could then basically do 30-40k with one attack. Crazy damage. This is now fixed. And then Overland, they just fixed the Queen's Elegance, so it now gives them power. This is a much better buff rather than just the extra damage on the next attack. And Dark Convergence, that they've just fixed a few issues with this. Beyond that, that's pretty much the main changes. There isn't really anything else worth mentioning. The only thing I would say is that a lot of these changes are kind of designed to be play how you want. So the idea that if you like to obviously play as a Magicka build, but you want to use Rally, for example, you now can. You can now have a burst deal, and you can also have the damage buffs. So as a Magicka Templar, you could actually use Rally for your weapon and spell damage buff, and also get the Stam regen, which is really good because you're a melee class. Same with Magicka Dragon Knight. So this could give some really interesting playstyles. The big thing that's really missing from this is, does this change affect with heals? The big thing they did say is that it's going to focus on really kind of the kind of offensive stuff, it says. So it doesn't say whether it's going to work on heals or not, but that's the big thing I'll be asking about, and I will be testing. I am going to call this here though, because it is long enough as it is, and I'm just going to leave it as the raw edit. If you do get any questions though about any of the sets, anything you want me to test on PTS, or how does this work, then let me know in the comments down below, and I'll do my best to reply. And do subscribe so you don't miss out on the gear set reviews that I'll be doing in the next couple of days. But I'm going to say a massive thank you to everybody on Patreon who has supported me thus far and continues to do so. It really, really helps. And I want to thank everybody for watching this long. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, and bye.